Welcome to the Unity BootCamp lesson on Reconnect authentication.
Let's talk about what brainCloud does on a successful authentication request. The server returns a response with the profile ID. Then the brainCloud wrapper will save the generated anonymous ID and the profile ID to the user's hard drive. In order to re-authenticate with brainCloud with the same profile ID that we used in the previous lesson, we'll need to use a different brainCloud request, the Reconnect request. In the API reference, let's investigate the Reconnect request. A Reconnect request will use the saved profile ID and anonymous ID to re-authenticate with the brainCloud server. Just like the authenticate anonymous request from the previous lesson, the Reconnect request requires 2 callback lambdas to be supplied. Open Visual Studio. In the network class, we need to determine if the profile ID and the anonymous ID are already saved to the user's device. Declare a method called hasAuthenticated_previously. Verify that the saved profile ID and anonymous ID strings are not empty. If they aren't, that means that the user has previously authenticated with brainCloud, and we should use the Reconnect request to authenticate them. Scroll down to the bottom and declare a private method called handleAuthenticationSuccess. In the Bootcamp series, we will be covering several different types of authentication, and each one repeats the same logic on a successful authentication request. We'll use this function to avoid repeating code. We'll be adding more logic to it in future lessons. In the request anonymous authentication method, delete the if statement and its body that checks the success callback delegate, and in its place, invoke the handleAuthenticationSuccess method. After that, we'll implement the Reconnect method. Notice that it uses the same authentication delegates from the previous lesson. You'll also notice that the body of the Reconnect method is very similar to the anonymous authentication method we wrote in the previous lesson. It has a pair of lambda callbacks to handle the result of a Reconnect request. In the last line of this method, we'll invoke the brainCloud's Reconnect request. Pass in the 2 lambdas we just wrote as arguments. Save the file. Open the game class. Navigate to the handleAuthentication method. We're going to modify this method to check to see if the user has previously authenticated with brainCloud. And if they have, we'll invoke the network's Reconnect method. However, if they have not previously authenticated, then we'll invoke the network's request anonymous authentication method instead. It should be noted that this technique for reconnecting to brainCloud applies to all forms of authentication, not just anonymous authentication. Save the file. Navigate to the brainCloud dialog script. In the onLogin button clicked method, delete the to-do statement, and in its place, hide the dialog, and then invoke the game's handleAuthentication method. Save the file, and then open Unity. Back in Unity, if you need to perform a manual refresh, do so now. Run the game. Notice we've authenticated, but it's not totally apparent whether we're reconnecting or authenticating anonymously. We'll double check with the logs to confirm that it is a reconnect request. And we can see that it is.
Logging out an authenticated user is the next lesson in the Unity Bootcamp.